Ladies, gentlemen, and all variations thereupon, this week we're going to be making this Bronze Age blouse. And this was probably the easiest sewing project I've ever done, so why don't you join me and I'll show you how we make it. So this is something I'm doing spur of the moment. I haven't brought any specific material for it or anything. It's just I've seen a video on this online. It'll be linked up the top somewhere. And I just thought it was such a unique, simple way of doing something. It's very material efficient. I thought I'll just use a little bit of fabric that I've got in my fabric stash and try and make one myself. Now what we'll need to start are some body measurements. First thing we'll need to start is the circumference around the chest, something I've already got. Second thing we'll need is measurement from the top shoulder seam on whatever garment you're wearing at the moment, down to as low as you want the top to come. For me, I'm going to do it towards my hip, so about the widest point of my body, down there, which is about 58, 60 sort of centimetres, somewhere around that range. I'm not particularly fussed exactly where it falls at the bottom because this is just, it's largely an experiment for me. The other measurement we're going to need is from the top of the shoulder seam, as we just were, to somewhere below the armpit. So I'm going to go to roughly to where, just above where my bra would start, at the side down here, which for me is about 30-40 centimetres down. So there are your three measurements, and that's what we'll need. And then we're just going to transfer that straight onto some fabric. So join me on the floor as I become a floor goblin and we'll start marking out this top. Okay, so here's my fabric, and this isn't fabric I've bought specifically. This is just some fabric that you may see in the background of most of my videos that's used as part of my cloak. This was just spare material that I brought thinking I wouldn't have enough, so I was going to use this for a hood. Anyway, it's just, I think it's 1 metre long, not even 1 metre, 93 centimetres. It's obviously shrunk in the wash because I pre-washed the fabric. First thing we're going to need is the top measurement, the length of it. So that's going to be from the shoulder seam down to however low you want your fabric to go. For me, about 60. So now we're going to need from the shoulder around there, 33 centimetres. Let's do 32 because that is right at the edge of my fabric. So I've got just enough there. That's the length to the shoulder, and that's the length going halfway around my arm. Then we want the circumference all the way around. This is one that people can often get wrong when measuring because they let the tape measure sag down a little bit. So that's 96, but I'm going to go a little bit further because I want it slightly looser than that. I'm going to go for, let's go for 98 centimetres. Down here. So I only actually need that part of the fabric going down there, so I'm just going to cut a line directly across there. Might add an extra centimetre on just to make sure I've got some extra for seam allowance. And of course people doing this in the Bronze Age wouldn't have had a measuring tape, they would have just used it as measurements from the body, so they're probably using measurements from the elbow to the tip of the finger and just saying, you know, that's the sort of length, so that's the sort of length, and then, you know, half of that again around the side. That's probably the measure they're using. I'm using a tape measure because I'm being more accurate as a modern person, because we're obsessed with doing things to specific numerical accuracies. People in ancient times, as long as it looked alright. Okay, so continuing the theme of simplicity, this is what I've just cut out. So I'm going to just fold that directly in half. And line up both sides because it's very stretchy fabric. Okay, so fold it in half, down there. And you won't be able to see this, but that's where I put my chalk mark for the length from the shoulder to under the arm, so there to there. And so, what we're going to do with this part is simply fold it over again. Right, so there we've got the sleeve, and there's the body of the top. And now we're just going to take the scissors and we're literally going to cut halfway across the top. Fold that over. Sleeves, fold this bit over. Body. So it's an ancient t-shirt, and it's got a really, this is the reason why I wanted to do it, it's got a really interesting T-shaped seam at the back. So all you need to do now is sew along the seams there, so seal up the armholes, and then sew the back onto the back of the sleeve, and then sew down this seam in the centre, and you've got a really interesting T-shaped seam at the back. And that's the reason why I wanted to do this, because sleeves, as you know, are the devil's work, but this is a really easy way to do seams. So to find the head hole, we're going to go directly up from the seam at the back to the centre mark, which is there, and then we're going to go 10 centimetres up the side, and just cut directly along that fold. Right, now just got to sew this up. And there we have it, that's the Bronze Age blouse with a distinctive T-shaped seam on the back. Few things about this is, firstly, as I said at the beginning, this was one of the easiest sewing projects I've ever done. Probably the easiest. It probably would have been even easier if I would have sewn it up by hand. I didn't. I used a sewing machine, which meant that as we were going along with the machine, the wool tended to bunch up once we got to the underarms where the sleeve seam met the actual body. So it got quite difficult to manoeuvre and go through there, so I've had to go through those again to make sure I sealed up the hole. If you were doing it by hand, you wouldn't have had that problem, but doing it by hand would take longer, and this, the whole thing, even with stopping to film and changing the camera angles and the lighting and so forth, took me less than an hour. It was that quick. So if you're a beginner sewer, especially if you're interested in historical sewing, then I recommend going for these Bronze Age blouses for a first project, because they are so simple and so easy and so forgiving. Because people weren't measuring accurately, you can be a little bit wibbly wobbly with it. So yeah, I am really happy with how that's turned out. So yeah, I'm really happy with this. It's a lovely little blouse. I didn't even have to do anything with the neck because the material's so stretchy. I just put my head through the hole and it's sealed up, so this is quite a warm top. And I don't think I would look out of place if I wore this down the street, although I probably would have to wear something underneath because this is wool and it's very scratchy and itchy, like a new jumper. But that's down to my choice of the material, not something that the Bronze Age people would have had to deal with as much. Although they actually did use wool, I expect this wouldn't have been the only layer for them either. So there we have it, a nice easy sewing project, and if you want to see more historic sewing, this video up here might interest you. And this video here has been picked out by the algorithm just for you. And if you click over here, you can subscribe to the channel where I will be doing more historic stuff like this. Ta-da!